Chapter 3. The Promise. Paris, France. January 1st, 2000. The new millennium dawned beneath a grey and freezing sky. The celebrations of the previous night had given way to confusion, speculation, and fear. Outside the museum, crowds gathered behind police barriers that stretched across the surrounding streets. Officers struggled to keep journalists and curious onlookers from crossing the cordons. Flashing blue lights reflected against wet cobblestones. Television crews crowded the entrances. News anchors spoke urgently into microphones. Authorities have confirmed 4 fatalities. The suspect remains unidentified. Investigators have yet to determine a motive. The questions came endlessly. Was anything stolen? Do police have a suspect? Is terrorism being considered? No answers were forthcoming. The museum stood silent behind the barricades. A crime scene. A tomb. 2 detective inspectors stepped from an unmarked police vehicle. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair beginning to grey at the temples. Detective Inspector Pierre Hermiage. The other was younger, leaner, and noticeably less impressed by rank. Detective Inspector Kyle Quasbeck. Several reporters immediately surged toward them. Inspector, can you confirm the deaths? Was the professor targeted? Do you believe the killer is still in Paris? Kyle ignored them. Pierre offered only a brief glare before continuing toward the museum entrance. Inside, the smell hit them immediately. Burnt flesh, chemical residue, death. The museum's operations director stood waiting near the front desk. David Langley, a sharply dressed man in his late 40s, whose expression suggested irritation rather than grief. Inspectors, he greeted. Pierre nodded. Kyle. The younger detective extended a hand. Call me Kyle. Langley blinked. Very well. Pierre sighed. And Pierre. The director looked mildly surprised. Of course. The 3 men proceeded deeper into the museum. Crime scene investigators moved through the corridors with practiced precision. Photographs flashed. Forensic officers dusted surfaces. Dogs searched every corner. Ultraviolet scanners swept over walls and floors. Evidence markers covered the gallery. The outlines of the dead remained visible. Kyle paused beside one. Vance, or what remained of him. The young detective frowned. Nothing about this scene felt right. Nothing. Any sign of forced entry beyond the fence breach? Kyle asked. None, Langley replied. Anything stolen? Not according to our records. Kyle stopped walking. Nothing? Langley shook his head. Every artifact remains accounted for. Pierre folded his arms. Then we begin with the cameras. The CCTV control room overlooked much of the museum. Rows of monitors flickered quietly. Hours passed. The investigators reviewed footage from every available camera. Nothing. Nothing. Still nothing. Then, one of the technicians paused. "Sir." Kyle leaned forward. "What is it?" The footage displayed the main lobby shortly before 3 in the morning. Professor Lucien's Moreau appeared on screen. He seemed terrified. The footage crackled. Static distorted the image. Then Lucien's suddenly rose into the air. Upside down, suspended. Kyle narrowed his eyes. "What is holding him?" Nobody answered. The image quality deteriorated further. Sparks erupted around the professor's body. Behind him stood something. Or someone. A dark blur. Almost human. Almost. The footage ended moments later. Silence filled the room. Pierre stood first. "Case closed." Kyle stared at him. "What?" Pierre gestured toward the monitor. The professor lost his mind. "That's your conclusion?" "He murdered the guards." Kyle laughed in disbelief. "How exactly did he hang himself upside down after killing 3 armed men?" Pierre shrugged. "People do strange things." "That's bullshit." The room fell silent. Technicians quickly pretended not to hear. Pierre's expression hardened. "Kyle." "No." The younger detective pointed at the frozen image. "Look at it." "I have." "Then explain it." Pierre stepped closer. "What I see is damaged footage and a dead man. What I see is a second person. What you see is imagination." The tension became unbearable. Finally, Pierre leaned closer. "Drop it." Kyle didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. The investigation concluded shortly after noon. Officially. Pierre filed his report. Murder-suicide. Case closed pending final forensic review. David Langley signed the required documentation almost immediately. The museum could reopen sooner. Insurance claims could proceed. Questions could disappear. Everyone seemed satisfied. Everyone except Kyle. Paris Police Headquarters. That evening, Kyle watched from across the room as the evidence tape was catalogued, filed, stored, forgotten. No one noticed his expression. No one noticed the decision forming behind his eyes. An hour later, he approached a junior officer named Memna. Need access to storage. Memna looked up. For what? Pierre wants me to verify chain of custody records. The young officer groaned. Again? Kyle smiled. You know how he is. That jackass can be a real pain in the... Well, you get the picture. Ha ha ha. Memna looked at him annoyed. For crying out loud, as he took the keycard badge from around his neck. It was dangling on a sliver bead chain, like the one military dog tags hang from. Memna rolled his eyes and slid the access key across the desk. Take it, he muttered. Just bring it back this time. Kyle forced a faint smile. You're a lifesaver. That's what worries me, Memna exclaimed. Kyle took the keycard and walked away before the younger officer could ask any more questions. The corridors of police headquarters seemed unusually quiet that evening. Most of the day's personnel had already gone home. Only a skeleton crew remained. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Every footstep echoed. Kyle descended the staircase leading into the secure evidence archives beneath the building. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Concrete walls, steel doors, security cameras. The place always reminded him of a mausoleum. Thousands of unresolved stories rested behind those locked doors. Thousands of lives frozen in plastic bags and cardboard boxes. Victims, killers, witnesses, secrets. The evidence vault waited at the end of the corridor. A heavy, reinforced door fitted with multiple electronic locks. Kyle stared at it. For several moments he did nothing. The keycard felt strangely heavy in his hand. One swipe. That was all it would take. One decision. One mistake. One career-ending mistake. The detective closed his eyes. Pierre's words returned to him. Drop it. The case is closed. Murder-suicide. Officially, that should have been the end. A good detective followed procedure. A good detective trusted evidence. A good detective certainly did not steal evidence from his own department. Yet every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The museum, the footage, the burns, the impossible nature of the murders. It felt familiar. Not the details, the feeling, that nagging certainty. the certainty that had haunted him for years, the certainty that he should have seen it sooner. His jaw tightened. A memory surfaced. Mariana. The image struck him without warning. Her smile, her laugh, the way she used to steal his cigarettes, only to snap them in half whenever she caught him smoking. You'll die before you're 50. And you'll nag me until I'm 80. A simple conversation, an ordinary memory, the kind that hurt the most. Kyle opened his eyes. The vault door blurred slightly, not because of tears, because he could suddenly see another door, another hallway, another night. 5 years earlier. Rain hammered the city. Detective Kyle Quasbeck stood outside a courthouse while officers escorted a notorious gang leader into an armored transport vehicle. Flavio Santorni, drug trafficker, racketeer, violence producer, murder suspect. For years, the man had escaped justice through bribery and intimidation. Not this time. Kyle had personally built the case. Months of surveillance, months of undercover work, months away from home, months away from Mariana. As Santorni was forced into the vehicle, he looked directly at Kyle, smiling. Not angry, not defeated. Smiling. I'll remember you. Kyle remembered the exact words. He remembered the feeling, too. The chill, the warning. The door slammed. Yes, the sound forever echoed in Kyle's ears. In his head, the sound, he would never forget the echo that haunted his dreams. He stood there on the middle of the curve as reporters snapped pictures trying to get a final comment from Santorini's lawyer and other state officials as he was hauled away in the police-infested vehicle. Through the cold of the glass window of the armored truck door. Santorini and Kyle's eyes locked onto one another. The young star police officer simply looked on. 3 weeks later, Flavio Santorni, the younger, was dead. Beaten to death by inmates. Rivaling gang factions, no doubt. A paid hit for one of the most notorious gangsters in the history of the state. This before he could even stand trial. The newspapers called it prison justice. Kyle knew better. There was no justice in what followed. Flavio's younger brother, Vivio Santorni, blamed him. Vivio stood at the edge of the abyss. What's worst, it was his henchman, Damian Fraslelcho, who introduced Kyle to him, and he who in turn introduced Kyle to his brother, after doing good work in collecting and safeguarding their dirty money and helping to eliminate some of their enemies. Kyle was undercover, of course. Very deceptive, he had Vivio fooled all in the name of shattering the Santorni dynasty. So it was not the inmates, not the prison system. Kyle, the detective who had put Flavio behind bars, the detective who had started everything. the retaliation, vengeance had to come swiftly, brutally, as the crowd left the funeral grounds, leaving only himself and his capos at the hole of the gravesite. Vivio spoke to Damien. "Get on your knees." "Boss?" Damien questioned, shaking in his bones, as this was an unexpected ambush. You heard the boss, a henchman, snarled before he stormed from among the group of men, and knocked Damien to the ground using the butt of an AK-47 rifle. He started to bleed from the back of his head, his coat soiled in the dirt, dug up to bury his brother. "Please, please, Vivio, don't do me like this." The man whimpered on his knees, clutching the back of his head in his palm to suppress the blood. "You piece of shit! This all your fault?" he screamed. As the veins stood on his forehead, his raven black hair, glossy, became unraveled. "Please, boss, I didn't know he was lawman. It's not my fault." "You're right, it isn't your fault. It was mine." He then took out a desert Glock pistol and rested it in Damien's temple and pulled the trigger, his eyes filled with rage. The blood splatter from the man's marrow wet the flowers and wreaths that lay atop the coffin as the body fell beside the hole on the surface. The mob boss was then handed an handkerchief and a bottle of rosea, ultra-expensive champagne. He wiped his black leather gloves to a shine, and the man popped the top of the champagne bottle and gave it to him. Vivio then poured some in the hole atop the casket and took a large gulp and sip. The death of his brother clearly left him unhinged. It was dangerous to kill a man in that fashion. In the open, broad daylight, the sound of the shot had echoed. But he didn't care. This was a blood debt. He would avenge his brother, or follow him to the grave. "I want the bastardo cop responsible for this strung up. But before we do, I want you all to deliver a telegram." One evening, Kyle returned home after a double shift. The front door stood open. The house was silent. Too silent. His gun had already been in his hand before he crossed the threshold. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen looked untouched. The smell of his wife's chili saramosa stew was irradiating the air still. Her program, The Hildies, was in full swing on the Channel 5. The sound of the television was the only sound he heard. "Mariana," he called as the bizarre atmosphere closed in on him, choking all sense of normalcy away. He made his was toward the back of the house where their storage room was, to clear the first floor upon tactically clearing the passage and making his way to the storage room. He saw nothing, and so he backtracked his steps and made his way up the staircase. He bent the turn in the corridor and made the startling discovery. The blood. A single staining trail stretching across the floor, leading toward the bedroom. He followed it. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder. "Mariana, baby, where are you?" Every instinct begging him to stop, As water filled his eyes, his heart pounded within an inch of exploding. The bedroom door stood partially open. He used his hand to gently hold the cold painted silver knob and gracefully move the wooden barrier of a bedroom door out the way. Christ in heaven did not prepare him for what he saw next. And like Dante, he was overcome with a mad fit of grief. Mariana lay beyond it, laying in a crucifixion pose, gunshot wounds to her heart, and to her head, her blood staining, soaking into the sheets of a place they considered most sacred the sight, destroyed him as he ran over to hold her lifeless body, dropping his pistol to the ground. The memory still shattered him, even now, years later. No amount of time could dull the image, no amount of counseling or words, no amount of alcohol, no amount of cigarettes, no amount of work. Nothing. The police report called it gang retaliation. The newspapers called it a tragedy. Kyle called it what it truly was. His fault. If he had never pursued Santorni, if he had never made the arrest, if he had simply looked the other way, Mariana would still be alive. That belief had poisoned him ever since. Months later, he finally tracked Vivio Santorni to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. The confrontation had turned into a bloodbath. Gang members everywhere. Weapons drawn. Kyle had nearly died. A bullet had shattered his shoulder. Another had missed his throat by centimeters. Then Pierre and his reinforcements arrived, and like a military general, the captain ordered a full-scale strike on the premises. Pierre and the right-wing guard infiltrated from the southeast staircase, aided by the bomb unit, who blasted a hole in the western machine room wall, reinforced by SWAT specialists, and the roof was stormed by drop troopers, all clad in black masks and helmets do or die. This feud would end today. It was hard for an hour. Retaliatory gunshot pinned down Kyle and the troopers, until Kyle spotted an old gas line that passed overhead the office enclosure, where Santorni and his men had barricaded like a mini fortress. He struck, launching 3 shots. It exploded, taking down all the heavy metal piping and the concrete canvas overhead of the Villians. On the henchmen, fallen rubble and debris and fire. The troopers stormed the entrails of the perimeter, while the gangsters, under distraction from the blast fires, started to retreat and scatter. Some were shot as they ran, others lay lifeless under fire and rubble. The vent doors to the warehouse area burst open, and Pierre's men suddenly infiltrated the area from below. It was flooded with officers, toppling what gangsters remained. The day was won on the lower levels. As Kyle infiltrated the decaying, run-down rooms one by one, suddenly, desperately, he could not be at peace until he soaked Santorni's body in bullets. Only then would he be able to sleep. He had to be sure he landed the killing blow in retribution for his beloved. He surveyed the rubble, combing through the area, searching for Santoni's body, but still on guard. As he passed a large, rusty operations machine panel, out of its shadow came a pistol pressed into his back. "You were warned. If you cross one Santoni, you cross us all. Now die, you motherfucker." Blam! A shot rang out into the area as further officers converged. Kyle could still hear the gunshot. One shot. One perfect shot. Vivio Santoni collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the floor. Pierre had saved his life. Yet even that victory felt hollow. Nothing could bring Mariana back. Nothing could erase the guilt. A few months after the funeral, Kyle stood alone before her gravestone. He finally had the courage to come back and look at it. He brought a bouquet of tulips, her favorite. As the reality slowly took hold, beneath a freezing downpour of rain, no reporters, no officers, no family. Just him and her. A cigarette barely burned between trembling fingers. Tears mixed with rainwater as they ran down his face. For the first and only time in his life, he spoke aloud to the dead. "I failed you." The words came broken, raw. "I was supposed to protect you." The silence that followed hurt more than anything. Then came the promise. The promise that he would repeat every year, every anniversary, every sleepless night thereafter. "I won't fail anyone else." The cigarette fell from his hand. "I swear it."
Da da da